For those of you who are attending, this is the annual Cameco Community Update. We will be going over some steps as people are still coming into the meeting. Meeting guidelines. By participating in this meeting, you understand that this meeting is being recorded. You may be muted for background noise. During the questions and comments, we will focus on topics related to today's presentation. Each section will have its own Q&A. We'll do our best to listen and address all comments and questions so that everyone has the opportunity to participate. Thank you for your patience and understanding. We really wanted to have this meeting live, but as you know, we were not able to. Today's agenda will be, we'll have our welcome, then we'll go into permitting, enforcement, and lastly, cleanup, with questions and answers in between the sessions. Now I would like to pass this on to Rizgar Gassi, Deputy Director, Hazardous Waste Management Program, to do your welcome.
Thank you, Elsa. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's meeting. We have several updates as agenda was shown to you earlier from permitting program to give you an update on the status of the permit renewal application. We'll also give you an update on the violation scoring procedures for Cameco and their score and the next steps for this facility on the rulemaking that we're working on for VSP. Also, from the cleanup program, we'll give you an update on the status of the investigations at the site. With that, I welcome you again and thank you for making time for tonight's meeting. With that, I'll pass it on to Peter Garcia.
Thank you, Rizgar, and welcome everybody. My name is Peter Garcia. I'm the Division Chief for our Site Mitigation and Restoration Program. I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting this evening on behalf of our Site Mitigation team. We're going to be talking this evening about some of the progress we've made over the last year, despite the challenges we've had from the COVID situation. But we have been working diligently in the field, and we have been completing further investigations and some cleanup activities that have occurred. And we have staff this evening that are going to talk about, they're going to speak to the activities that we've been conducting over the last year. So hope you get some good information out of our presentations. I will turn the presentation back over to Elsa.
Okay, now we will conclude with continue with our permitting update. And we have Wayne who will be giving this presentation.
Thank you, Elsa. My name is Wayne Lorenzen. I'm the Permitting Division Chief for DTSC, and I'd like to give you some information tonight about the status of DTSC's review of Cameco's permit application, what to expect next, and then answer any questions that you might have. So the first thing I wanted to go over was the current authorization, which is their permit. California and federal law both require Cameco obtain authorization to operate their hazardous waste management equipment at the facility to recycle spent lead acid batteries. DTSC issues authorizations in the forms of permits. So Cameco's current permit was issued in 2005 for a 10-year period. Both California and federal law extend the authorization of the permit if the permittee submits a complete permit renewal application before the end of that 10-year authorization period. Next, I'll talk about their current application. Cameco submitted a complete renewal application in 2015, so they met that criteria for extending the authorization. So their permit remains in effect and completely enforceable under the law until DTSC approves the permit application or DTSC denies the permit application and all rights of appeal have been exhausted. DTSC reviewed that application in 2015 and required Cometco to submit revised applications over the last 5 years. The application that we are currently reviewing does not include the expansion of operations that Cometco has proposed to South Coast AQMD. Next, I'd like to cover the permit decision. So when we make a permit decision on a permit application, we don't make a decision until we consider public comments. But before we do that, we release a draft decision for public review. We are planning on making a draft permit decision this year, before the end of this year. And I know this slide shows permit modifications next, but it doesn't flow right. So I'd like to jump to public notice and then come back to permit mods afterwards. So for that draft decision that I just talked about will be announced as either a draft approval or a draft denial. DTSC will announce this in a newspaper ad, a radio ad, mail notices out to the individuals on our mailing list for this facility. Please let us know if you would like to be added to that mailing list. The notification will announce a 45-day public comment period and include access to either a notice of intent to deny or a draft permit. It will also provide links to the permit application, DTSC's written rationale for the draft decision, and other relevant documents. At least 30 days after we send that notification, we will hold a public hearing for the decision where we will provide background for our decision, our draft decision, and then listen and record any comments anyone wishes to make verbally at the hearing. During that time, we will be asking for public input on our draft decision, and anyone can submit written comments or provide comments at the public hearing. After the 45-day public comment period, we then consider all of the comments and decide whether our draft decision should be changed based on each comment. Since the decision is based on the documents we will release, such as the basis for our draft decision, we're looking for comments that provide useful information about what we considered to make our draft decision. All of us are always available to listen to your concerns or answer questions before opening up any comment period, but really looking for input on the documents we release during the comment period. And then finally, with the final decision, after we review and consider all of those comments, we will provide written responses and issue a final decision. Anyone who provided comments during that comment period can petition to appeal a final permit decision. And then lastly, I just wanted to give you some updates on a couple of authorizations that requests for authorizations that we received. Cometco requested and DTSC approved a temporary authorization recently to install equipment to remove additional liquids from waste that Cometco stores in their containment building. However, that decision was appealed and is currently stayed until a decision is made on the appeal. So effectively, that means that the approval of that temporary authorization will not go into effect until a decision is made on the appeal. And then lastly, as I indicated before, Cometco has not, in their permit application, they have not proposed expansion, but they have indicated to us that they intend to seek authorization from DTSC for the expansion of their operation time. This will not be part of DTSC's upcoming permit renewal decision. It would be a later decision open to public comment. And with that, I'll turn it back to Elsa and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so now, if you want to ask a question, you can always ask in the Q&A. And we have Marcia, who will actually be handling the questions. And you can also raise your hand, or you could use your keyboard by putting Alt-Y to raise the hand. So I'm now going to hand it over to Marcia.
Thanks, Elsa. I don't see any questions in the Q&A feature yet. So we'll take our first three, and then I'll check with our Chinese channel, and I'll check with our Spanish channel. Also, to note, if you're on the phone and have a question, you can press *9 to raise your hand. So Angela Johnson, would you like to ask your question? Sorry, Angela Johnson Mesaros. I didn't see anything. Please,
Yes.
please. Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just had a quick question on the temporary permit application that Wayne just talked about. I would like to know if Quemeco has already installed all of the equipment that DTSC had approved in that temporary permit authorization.
I'm happy to take that. Thanks, Angela, for that question. It's a temporary authorization. It's a temporary authorization is a unique kind of special authorization that DTSC considers from an applicant that changes their current authorization. So it changes their permit. So the temporary authorization request that we got was to add 2 pieces of equipment. One was a auger. I won't be able to remember the exact the names of the equipment, but they have been installed in the building, but our understanding is that they are not operating pending the decision on the appeal. So they have been moved into the building and installed, yes.
And do you know when we should expect to hear back from the permit appeals officer?
I don't have a good answer to that question. I don't think anyone from the appeals unit is on this call. We can find out for you and get back to you if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. We will move to Adriana Quinones. I see you also have a question in the chat. If you'd like to verbally ask that question, I'll note that we're going to answer it live.
Yes, I would definitely like to ask that verbally. In the last community meeting that we had, there was a lot of concerns, and we were told that there would be no actions, no authorizations, no permits until there was another public hearing. And in that public hearing, you were going to address the concerns that the community had, which were very many concerns. So my question is, why are we, providing authorizations and also moving the permit along when you have not provided the community with an opportunity to hear back about the concerns we had, and also to voice our concerns, the current concerns that we had? Definitely disappointed in DTSC about these actions.
Thank you, Adriana. I'm assuming that you're referencing the temporary authorization that we made an approval for a permit decision without consulting with the public. This temporary authorization was to install 2 pieces of equipment that DTSC considers to be a significant improvement for the facility. It allows them to dewater their paste, and it removes liquids from the paste, essentially taking that liquid out before they're able to place it on the floor. So That is why we made the decision to approve the temporary authorization, because it was a significant improvement to their operation.
But you do understand that in the meeting, DTSC said that there would be no authorizations, no permits until the community was notified. And this has not happened.
And that's so when we're getting ready to make a permit decision on their permit application, which is essentially their request to operate for another 10 years. That is the big authorization that we're planning on providing a public notice on this year. So before we make that decision to either deny or approve that application, definitely we're going to have public meeting. We're going to have a public hearing. We're going to ask everyone for comments. We don't make that final decision without asking for public input.
You have a follow-up meeting to the one we had previously in which we had concerns. Those concerns need to be addressed before we move any permit forward.
Understood.
Thank you. I'm going to move to our next raised hand, and then we'll check in with the folks on the Spanish channel and the Chinese channel. So I'm going to invite William Feiss to ask your question.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm an old guy. I've lived in the community even before Quemetco was placed where it is in my neighborhood. Served on the AQMD committee about 6 years ago, and I'm very familiar with this process, which I'm hearing about this evening. And my big question is this. There will be public hearings, and you folks will listen to what the public says. But it was in my experience as a member of the committee that was set up by the AQMD, is that it really won't matter too much. Is that the decision's going to be made based on what you folks at AQMD decide to do. And since you have all the expertise, of course, that's understandable. But my real question is this. The Los Angeles County, the Board of Directors is recommending against the Los Angeles County Board of Directors is recommending against approving the extension of this permit because there have been too many times that Quemetco has not been in compliance. And the experience I had when I was on the committee with the AQMD was exactly that. Quemetco had been out of compliance over and over again. It was rare that they were ever in compliance. And yet the AQMD continued to find reasons to extend the permits, or they were going to do this, they were going to mitigate that. And in the end, after a couple of years of this, I began to realize it really didn't matter what those of us on the committee were saying, because in the end, we told them, why do you keep approving these permits when they've been out of compliance? I looked into the history of Quemetco all the way to the time when they first were installed here in the City of Industry, a few blocks from my home. They were caught delivering slag through a Mexican company to Tijuana and dumping their slag. This is just one of many of the things that they did over the years. And yet, with a history like that and with failure to be in compliance, for some reason, they were always given an extension. The Board of Directors is recommending against that this time, and that's why I decided to join this conversation tonight. I'm 87 years old, and I don't get involved in too much of this stuff anymore after having participated in the AQMD process a few years ago with great discouragement. But I will say this, if you guys go ahead and approve this permit when you know they are not yet in compliance, you are doing the community a disservice. And I'll just say this, I know it won't do much good, but I want to tell those of you that are listening tonight, this is the pattern. It's gone on over and over again. If you look into the history of the AQMD and the DTSC, what you will find that they have boards that direct them. And these boards are controlled by members of those boards who are politically influenced. Now, I just read just a couple of days ago, a fellow by the name of Jim Brulte. He was a Republican fellow, and he was gloating over the fact that they had now taken over. This is AQMD now. This is not you guys at DTSC, all right? They were gloating over the fact that they now had control of the Southern California Air Quality Management District Board. Well, what do you think that means? It means that the few folks here who work at those places, those places like AQMD and your group, you guys really will be directed by those people on your board. And the community doesn't know that. You're going to make decisions not so much in the interest of the community, but by what your boards tell you. And your boards, I don't know about you guys there at where you are at the DTSC, but I know this, the AQMD is now totally under the control of Republicans who represent big business. And the cleanup that's supposed to go on in the Bay Area now will never happen. And that is why the board, the Los Angeles Board of Directors is saying to you folks, unless these fellas at Quemetco are totally in compliance with all the rules, you should not approve their going forward with more permits. That's
Thank
all
you,
I have
sir.
to say.
Thank you, sir. I'm gonna ask if our colleagues in the permitting program would like to respond.
Yeah, I would just like to quickly say I understand the concern, and thank you for those, William. I really appreciate those. I want to just let you know that the people that work in permitting, they do care about the comments that we get, and we do read and consider every one of them. It's important for us. It's important for us to go into the communities and ask for input. And sometimes it's really hard to do, but all of us really care about the information that we get from the people that live around these facilities, because a lot of us live in a different part of the state. So I really appreciate your comments. And I just want to let you know that the people, the staff in the permitting division do care about the comments.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And all I can do is reiterate from my own personal experience, having served in those committees many years ago, that public input is less effective than the citizens realize. But thank you for your response. And we did have, by the way, joint meetings with the DTSC back in those days, in around 2015 or 2016 when I served on the committee. And I will say that the DTSC was a little more straightforward than was the AQMD. The folks that I met, at least in your organization, seem to be doing a more conscientious job. So give you credit for that. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to go to Rizgar. He had another comment in response to Adriana. And then I'm going to check in with our other channels and take some questions from the Q&A feature. We're going to get to as many people who want to engage with us tonight as we can. We do have 2 more updates to get through. But if your question doesn't get answered and you type it into the and you type it into the Q&A feature, or if you email us, Elsa's going to share the contact information for the folks giving the updates at the end of the meeting. So if there are still some questions that haven't been answered, we can make sure to keep the conversation going. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. Mr. Feist, thank you for your comments. They're great comments. Absolutely. We will, as Wayne said, we'll consider those comments. Just want to assure you that we will hold the facility accountable. If there's any violation the facility has from our inspections, we will require the facility to come into compliance. We will not make a decision if the facility continues to be in non-compliance. So that is utmost importance to us, that we keep the facility in compliance, and they need to be rectify any violations that we find at the facility. I just want to add to Adriana's comment regarding the public hearing. I just want to make sure Wayne explained it quite very well. So when we had the public meeting a year ago or so, we had talked about the permit renewal decision, and that's the one that we wanted to make sure that at that time we did agree that we will have a public hearing for that permit decision, and we will have that permit decision. I think what might have been confused with the permit authorization, the modification they required for the dewatering system they want to put in, that has its own process, and we did communicate that with several. With LA County and others regarding that decision. However, for the permit renewal decision, that will definitely have a public meeting and public hearing to hear your input on that. And that tonight's input will also be part of our consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizgar. I'm going to check in with our interpreters now. Do we have any questions on the Spanish line? Thank you. How about the Chinese line? I'm not getting any response for questions from the Chinese line. So I'm going to take a couple of questions from the Q&A feature. So I have a question from Al Young about testing in the Leg Lake Regional Park Animal Reserve. So he has a question about testing in the Leg Animal Reserve. So I'm going to ask, I'm not sure if that's a question for permitting.
Marcia, I'll take that question.
Okay.
I apologize. I don't believe this project has looked at this particular specific question, but we could take that question from you and come back to you with a response. Thank you.
Okay. And we have a few comments, which I'm just going to consider to answer live because they're comments. So I'm going to publish one. The first one is from Martha Pacheco. And, you know, in the interest of time and that these are comments, I'm just going to publish them so that people can see what each other is thinking. And then I have one from Rebecca Overmeyer Velasquez, says that she has information to provide us. So Rebecca, I would encourage you to contact the project team with the information that you have so that we can get that from you. And then we have a question from an anonymous attendee. It says, I have read that the facility has 24/7 air monitoring. Is that true? So I'll invite Wayne or Rizgar if you'd like to address that.
Sure, I'll take that. The short answer is yes, they do have continuous air monitoring for specific criteria pollutants.
All right.
Yeah, Marcia, that question, absolutely, they do have monitoring around the perimeter of the facility. That question more appropriate for the South Coast to respond because they're the ones that work with with Comedco to ensure that continuous air monitoring does occur at the facility, and that's reported on their website. The data.
Okay. So that can be found on South Coast Air Quality Management Control's website. So if you'd like more details on the air monitoring, you can find it there. So the next raised hand I have is Alicia Chavez or Alicia. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I support the responsible recycling of the batteries. I am a member of the community and I feel like they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So therefore, I do support Comedco. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right. We will go to Jasmine Cisneros.
Hi, I just wanted to comment and say that I too support the responsible recycling of these batteries. I think they're out there and we might as well support a facility that does a responsible job. So I support Comedco as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. Next is Kathia Velasco.
Hi. I just wanted to say that also I support responsible recycling of batteries and I support Comedco and I think that they're essential to the community. And this is also a community member saying this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Emily Correa.
Good evening. I don't really have a question, but as a member of the community, I just did want to comment that I do support the responsible recycling of batteries. So I support Comedco. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. These are moving quick. All right. Let's see. We have David Meraz. Sorry. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Hi, sorry, I actually typed up my question, but I'll be happy to read it.
That's okay.
No, that's totally fine. I'm 33 years old. I just want to say that I trust my government to make the right decision. California is one of the most environmentally safe states, and I feel that Quantico does a sufficient job of being responsible in recycling. I trust this company rather than sending it to another part of the world which won't regulate this industry. So I support their efforts in recycling batteries.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying. Okay, there we go. Make sure we keep the hands going. Roger Ortiz.
Hey, good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Hey, I just wanted to take a moment to just, because there's so many communities that are affected by this and, having a company that is actually doing it responsibly and, we can take care of this, this environmental, important issue. I support Comedco, and I think that, they're doing, it's something that's going to benefit our community and the world.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Okay. All right. Roger Ortiz. I'm trying.
He just went.
Oh, sorry. Let me just lower that hand. Vanessa Pineda. Vanessa, did you want to speak this evening?
¿Sí me escuchan?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, pues primero que nada, muchas gracias, que me da mucho gusto que tengan varios idiomas, ¿verdad? Para mucha gente que nos podamos llenar de esa información. Y yo también apoyo la responsabilidad de reciclar baterías. Yo apoyo a Comedco, ya que es muy importante más en estos tiempos del reciclaje. Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you. Okay, next, Rebecca Overmeyer Velasquez.
Hi. Yeah, so I represent, along with some other folks here, the Clean Air Coalition of North Whittier and Avocado Heights. And I too support the responsible recycling of batteries. Unfortunately, Quemeco is not the place where that happens. In fact, they are currently fighting a lawsuit. Have 29 documented violations of environmental law. They spent $600,000 last year on a fine that they paid AQMD for repeated emissions violations coming out of their stacks, arsenic, lead. These folks are repeatedly poisoning the community and are the last place we want to be recycling these kinds of toxic materials in the middle of a residential community. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was said and that the facts are abundantly clear that the facility poisons not only the residents around the community, in the community around the facility, but also the workers who work in the facility. And they need to know that as well. This is a dirty, dirty job, and Quemeco's not doing it well. So that was the first thing. And the other thing is, I just don't know, I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late. I don't know if you've actually talked about the Transect sampling plan and if there are any responses to our concerns about that plan that we sent to the director, Dr. Williams, several months ago. I don't know if anyone's talked about that. Thank you.
We haven't discussed the plan yet. That will come in the cleanup update. To your other points, would someone from the permitting program like to address them?
Sure. This is Wayne. Oh, go ahead, Rizgar.
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca, for your comment. Absolutely. We hold the facility accountable for any violations, and definitely we have a lawsuit against the facility. And that is part of our overall picture for when we make the permit decision for this facility. The facility needs to be in compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Duncan McKee. If you could please unmute.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Great. I actually served on that Pilot Environmental Justice Council with William Feist. And boy, that was at least 15 years ago, I think. But I have a couple of quick questions. In 2005, when the initial Title 22 permit was hastily pushed through, and there were permit conditions. And my understanding is that some of those conditions haven't been met to this day. And I'm wondering why, and why there aren't violations of that, and why they aren't required to meet those conditions. And in addition, there was an appeal filed in several of the various aspects of the different appeals. At least one of them was granted, which allowed METCO to, the wording in the permit was that they could process not only batteries, but other lead-bearing hazardous waste. And the appeal that was granted stated that allowed them to even potentially process leaking old canisters of chemical weapons as long as they contain lead. And DTSC attorneys agreed with that. And I'm just wondering why that wording still is in the permit, why it wasn't taken out since the appeal was granted. And I'm wondering if it's going to be in the new permit, which would allow them import hazardous waste from all over the world and process it at Quemeco. In addition, environmental impact report done by the Chambers Group way back prior to the 2005 permit. Can anybody answer that, please?
I think Rizgar would like to respond to you.
Duncan, hi. Yeah, thank you for your comments, Duncan. Yes, a couple of questions. I'll answer the question regarding the violations, and then I pass on the question regarding the permit, what's in the permit, and let Wayne respond to that question. As for the violations you mentioned and the permit that the condition I had, those are subject of the lawsuit that we have with the facility, and those are some of the violations we found when whether the facility has been implemented the programs that we have in that permit. So that's the subject of the lawsuit, and that's continuing now. And now with that, I'll pass it on to Wayne to answer the question regarding the permit.
Thanks, Rizgar. So we haven't made a decision on the permit application yet. So it's premature to say, will we be, have the same language in the same permit conditions. We are still reviewing their permit application. We expect to be making a decision soon. It could be to deny the application. It could be to approve the application. But thank you for that comment. We will look at that section and we'll consider that when we're moving forward with this. Thank you.
And I can't believe that you didn't, since the appeal was granted, why wasn't that verbiage removed from the permit that allowed them to process things other than lead acid batteries?
Yeah, I unfortunately I can't answer for, I'm assuming that happened in 2005. But if you would like to send us more details about that and share your concerns with us, we would be happy to get that information.
Okay, great. Thank you. What about the EIR?
For me, unfortunately, you were cutting out when you were talking about the EIR. I didn't catch all of that question.
So in 2005, there was a completely inept EIR submitted by the Chambers Group on behalf of Quemeco. And I'm wondering if there's a more protective, more comprehensive EIR that actually addresses serious concerns in the community that has been submitted in regards or in conjunction with the permit renewal application, the current one.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a CEQA unit within the permitting division.
And on that one?
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
What'd you miss?
Oh, I thought you maybe were still asking a question.
No, I'm just wondering if there's a new EIR that we can review and comment on prior to the, I'm speculating there, prior to you approving their application.
Right. Again, we haven't made that decision yet. If we were to approve a permit application, it would accompany an appropriate CEQA document. We have CEQA staff within the permitting division that make those evaluations. We are happy to consider anything that you want to share with us about your concerns about the prior EIR and it being inappropriate. We would appreciate and encourage you to submit that to us.
But I mean, isn't that a document publicly circulated? So dear little old ladies with grandkids that are suffering from ailments that we believe are attributable to the toxic substances released by Quemeco can actually comment on it.
Right. So the EIR that was prepared in the past is probably it's certified, right? It's certified by the county. But again, our obligation when we're making a permit decision is to evaluate CEQA and determine what is the appropriate document. So if you have information that you would like to share with us about that document being inappropriate, I would encourage you to do so.
What document are you referring to?
The prior EIR.
So are you relying on that?
No, what I'm saying is when we make a permit decision, we accompany the permit decision with an appropriate CEQA document. We haven't made that
Okay,
decision.
so can you answer yes or no whether there is a current EIR that was submitted in conjunction with the application for the permit renewal?
The CEQA document is not submitted with the permit application. That is a document that our
So I'm going to ask y'all.
So is there a current EIR?
Yes, there is.
Is there a current EIR?
There is a current
where
EIR.
Where can we get look and comment on it?
Duncan,
What's
maybe
that?
Duncan, this is Rizgar. Maybe I could jump in just to clarify. So there are, as Wayne said, we are preparing a CEQA document to support our permit decision. Typically, for a permit denial, there is no CEQA documentation prepared. For a permit issuance, we prepare a CEQA documentation. There also, the South Coast is also, we had worked with the South Coast. As you recall, they had public notice, they did a notice of preparation for their EIR. That EIR is comprehensive, that addresses multiple factors, not only the current operation of the facility, it's that their expansion request from the district, their district. So that you may be talking about that EIR, and that question really, I would like to refer to the South Coast to answer that question. The status of their EIR for the project.
Thank you all. I'm gonna have to ask Duncan and Rizgar and Wayne to continue your conversation at another time because we do have to move on to our next update. So thank you.
Yeah, I understand.
To everyone
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. So we're going to move to our next presentation, and I'll ask Ryan to go ahead and share your update.
Thank you, Marcia. I appreciate that. My name is Ryan Mia, and I'm a senior scientist in the Enforcement and Emergency Response Division. And I'm happy to be back to provide you with information regarding the Violation Scoring Procedure, or the VSP, as it's also known as, and to provide you with a brief enforcement update. So the VSP regulations took effect on January 1st, 2019. And these regulations apply to all operating DTSC permitted hazardous waste facilities in California. There's a little over 70 that that are statewide. And so this is a number that is updated on an annual basis. And so it's not something that stays the same and is just done once, it's done every year. And then it's also an additional tool to better support the permit decision-making process. And in other words, it's also not the only tool that permitting has at their disposal to evaluate whether or not a facility's to evaluate a facility's suitability for permit approval or denial. There's other criteria as well, but it's just one of an additional tool that they've been provided with. And so the VSP score is something that's calculated by assessing each Class 1 violation cited by DTSC over the previous 10 calendar years. And so implementation of these regulations essentially improves the public transparency because it requires posting of the facility VSP scores and compliance tier assignments every year by September 30th of every year. Next slide, please. All right. And so I'm going to begin by just talking in general about an overview of how the VSP score is calculated. DTSC inspections take place and may have class 1 violations that each of these class 1 violations receive a score based on how much hazardous wastes are involved with the violation and how much they present a threat to public health and the safety of the environment, as well as another part of things that are evaluated is the extent to which the facility's actions, or in some cases the lack of action, deviate from that which is required. And so each inspection occurs and then the violations are scored, and then each of those individual violation scores are added together to create an inspection violation score for that individual inspection. Next slide, please. And so then the inspection violation scores for each of the DTSC inspections that occurred over the last 10 years are added together. And then that number is divided by the total number of inspections conducted to produce a facility VSP score. And then based on that facility VSP score, there are compliance tier assignments that are then made with the criteria that is as follows in the next slide. Actually, I think we skipped over one slide, but essentially the compliance tiers, there they are. The compliance tiers are assigned if the facility VSP score is less than 20, then the facility is assigned a acceptable compliance tier. And if there is a score that is 20 or greater and less than 40, it falls into the conditionally acceptable compliance tier. And those facilities with a facility VSP score greater than 40 fall into the unacceptable compliance tier. And so for the conditionally acceptable and unacceptable compliance tiers, there are then more specific requirements identified in the regulations, things like third-party audits and compliance implementation plans and permits with enhanced compliance requirements and things of the like that the facilities are required to complete. Next slide, please. In general, this is a very simplified overview, but again, all the individual class 1 violation scores are added together to produce that inspection violation score for each inspection. And then the inspection scores for each DTSC inspection that occurred in the last 10 years are then added together and divided by the total number of inspections to produce a facility VSP score. And based on that facility VSP score, a compliance tier is then assigned to the facility. Next slide, please. And so the VSP is the first program in the entire nation to implement like a scoring procedure for permitted hazardous waste facilities. And, we've been doing this now. This is coming close to the third year that this is going to have been implemented. We've learned a lot, and we've learned a lot of lessons from doing this. And then also because of feedback we received from the public and impacted communities and our management. And essentially the bottom line here is we've heard these comments, we've heard this feedback, and in response to that feedback, there are some regulatory changes that are forthcoming and that we're proposing, and we'd like to discuss these changes with you at a workshop that will be coming next month in September. And so please keep an eye out for this meeting announcement. Come to the meeting, participate. We need your help to make improvements that matter. We want to make improvements to the process, but we want to make improvements that matter too. And your assistance with respect to this would be greatly appreciated. So thank you ahead of time for looking out for it and participating in that meeting as well. And then next slide, please. Next slide. All right. Well, we might be having some technical difficulties here, but I wanted to provide you that for Cometco, there it is, the 2019 facility VSP score for Cometco was 35.38. And then the 2020 facility VSP score was 38.33. And both of these facility scores place the facility in the conditionally acceptable compliance tier. And also to let you know that the facility has challenged the facility scores, and there's a dispute resolution officer, and his decisions regarding the challenge to these scores is still in process, and it has not yet been published, but it will be forthcoming. Next slide, please. Oops, back one more. This just quickly summarizes, I think there was a portion of the community that already talked about this, actually. There was a complaint that was filed in October 2018, a civil complaint in Los Angeles Superior Court against Cometco, alleging 29 violations, and a trial date has been set for this regarding for February 1st, 2022. And so this is the end of my presentation for today. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so you already know how we're going to do the questions. Any questions that we may not be able to answer tonight or get to tonight will be answered via email. So Marcia, can you start?
Sure. I'm actually going to start with one of the questions that we have in the Q&A feature, because that came up earlier during the permitting presentation. So the question is, Cometco has a facility VSP of 38.3 on the website conditionally acceptable. This requires a third-party audit. Has that audit been completed, or when is that audit required to be conducted? Are there any requirements for this renewal to wait for the results of that audit?
I can take that. Go ahead, Riz.
So for the panelists, when I read the question out, I move it to the answered portion. So if you need to read it to help you in your response, you'll find it in the answered section. It'll be at the very bottom.
Thank you. Marcia, I'll take that. I'm sorry, Wayne. I'll respond to that question. You're correct. If the facility is in the conditionally acceptable tier, they're required to have an audit, and there's a process they go through where we approve the firm that does the audit, and there's a process they need to submit a report. For Cometco had filed a lawsuit in regards to this the VSP score, and that lawsuit is entangled with the lawsuit that we have against Cometco. So that particular lawsuit has been put on hold until we go through our trial for our case that we have against Cometco. So that trial is on hold. So the facility has not submitted an auditing group to do this audit of the facility at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will go to our first raised hand, Alfredo de la Cruz. Oh, sorry, I think you tried to unmute at the same time I asked you to unmute. Please go ahead if you have a question. Okay. I will go to Jake Manzanares. If you, Alfredo, well, I'll try you again later.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I already mentioned this in the chat, but I'd just like to reiterate especially where everything's at in the world, and especially in our state. I'd just like to say that I support the responsible recycling of batteries, and I support Cometco. Thank you.
Thank you. The next hand up we have is Jay Luis Ceballos. I'm not sure that I'm getting a message from Zoom that that our Zoom versions are not compatible. So I would ask you, sir, to please type in your question if you don't mind. We have Al Young.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I was having technical difficulties trying to get my questions across. The thing I'm concerned about is in the VSP, it was in the LA Times in 2015, it indicated that Exide polluted around 10,000 homes. So it's a very possible affecting Whittier Narrows and the homes in the area. Their pollution started in 1933 or something like that. Why wouldn't you? I always believe in not reinventing the wheel. If you have a plant that is similar to Exide doing lead recycling, and they found that it polluted homes at least 1.7 miles from the plant, why is it that testing, when they do testing in regards to this particular plant, was only equivalent to about a quarter mile? And then on the VSP aspect, my question in regards to the VSP is, inspection, is this done annually for every 10 years, or is it done annually? And then the scores are based on the addition? And is there a clarification? And then the VSP scoring methodology is it located on the DTSC website? Are the scores disclosed to the general public? And then going back to the Exide thing, what I'm concerned about is because I've noticed that Exide was successfully bankrupt that company for that plant in Vernon. And the state of California basically got stuck with the cleanup because according to the article in LA Times, they said the DTSC for 33 years allowed the permit that this organization was to operate without a permit, even though constantly, providing violations and so forth. What I'm concerned about is if this happened before, how is this new VSP inspections going to make it any better? So there's multiple questions I have, and I'm concerned because of the area. We're living in a super fun area for water. If you raise the usage of the Cometco's use of water, how is that going to affect already the polluted water we already have underground? How is that going to affect the whole area? We have the Whittier Narrows, 1,400 acres reserved for animals as well as park. We have that dumps water down in the San Gabriel River area. Who knows what seeps down in below the soil? On these particular DTSC mandates, do they actually do check of the water below the water table? What is their mandate? Is it just whatever anybody wants? I'm not really clear about this, and I've been trying to get answers for months and years.
So I'm not sure who wants to go first, or if you want to summarize your question about our mandates or your question about VSP.
Marcia, we'll take these questions and unravel the questions. There's questions regarding the VSP. I think Ryan Maya is opt to answer that question. There's questions regarding the investigation. I think that those questions I believe we should save for the cleanup presentation. So if you don't mind, we just answer the VSP questions at this time and hold off to answering the other questions till later. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so with respect to the VSP, thank you, Al. Those are wonderful questions regarding the VSP. But because it is something that we produce on an annual basis, you're exactly correct. The 2019 scores are accounting for those inspections that DTSC conducted between like 2010 and 2019. And then the 2020 scores account for those DTSC inspections that occurred between 2011 and 2020. But it's whenever an additional inspection takes place, it's accounted for the following year in the VSP score. And so that's why the number changes a little bit. But you're absolutely correct. It's updated. It's updated every year to get the most recent 10-year time frame. And so that's why it's accounting for a different number of years each time, but it's always the last 10 for each corresponding year. And so I think that's hopefully answering most of your questions regarding the VSP score.
Okay, Ryan. Yes, I appreciate your answering that question. What it brings to mind right now, these scores are started through this particular methodology in 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And also, I think also one of the questions you had is it's whether or not they're posted in both the 2019 and the 2020 scores are posted to our public website. You look if you go to dtsc.ca.gov and you go under the enforcement tab, there's actually a sub tab called violation scoring procedure, and all of those scores are posted on that location.
So the VSP inspection that you mentioned that started in 2019, so there's really no record prior to that using VSP methods because the methodology was not approved until 2019. Is that correct?
Correct. In fact, we're the first in the nation to roll out such a program. It's kind of ambitious, but I think it's very well timed to provide some transparency. But you're absolutely correct. And so the 2019 VSP's facility score accounts for inspections that occurred between the years of 2010 through 2019.
I see.
Yeah, so it goes back 10 years beyond that. Yes.
Oh, I see. That's even better. Now, in regards to the weight of the VSP inspection score, how is that weighted in the decision making of the DTSC and what it should respond to those scores? Is that heavily weighted, like 80% or 50% of all data gathered? How does that affect DTC's response?
That's an excellent question too. Excellent question. All class 1 violations that DTSC cites during that 10-year time frame is scored. So every single class 1 violation that we have cited in during the course of our inspections during that 10-year time frame is accounted for in the score. Was your question regarding how it's weighted for the permitting decision? Okay, yes. I think that might be a permitting type of question, actually. But yeah, so I'm more in charge of just getting the score and calculating it. And so if someone can someone from permitting maybe address the weight? I mentioned that this is one of many tools that permitting has to evaluate a facility. Could someone talk to Mr. Young about the weight of this number compared to maybe some of the other tools as well that you might have?
Sorry, I don't clearly understand the question.
Wait,
yeah.
It's very simple. I mean, you have this methodology using VSP method that we have inspection. So apparently there are other tools that they do measure against. And once they gather all these tools, then the DTSC makes a decision how they react to a particular entity on the violations that they create or have created. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and short answer for you, it's in regulation. There's a list of 12 items that we consider. It's new. It came with our VSP regulations. If you can't remember this, I'll you can email me and I'll point you to the right location, but it's in 66271.55 in Title 22 of California Code of Regulations. There's a list of 12 items that we consider for permit decisions related to VSP. They include not only the VSP score, but the minor violations, the facility's safety record, and other items as well.
Okay. I will. You say this is can be discovered on the DTSC website?
I'll put the citation in the chat if that helps. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Wayne. I'm gonna move on to our next raised hands. We've got a few more. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Rizgar. Thank you for your questions, Mr. Young. Our next raised hand is going to be Martha Cabral.
Hello.
Hi, Martha.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
Thank you for all the information. My name is Marta Cabral, and I support the Chemaco company. And to follow up the company and do everything in there. I support the Chemaco company.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm still here. Listen, all the information.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask our interpreters if there are any questions now on the Chinese or Spanish lines. Okay. Give them a minute. No? Okay. It looks like we don't have any questions on our interpretation lines. So Duncan, we're back to you. You've typed a question into the chat and also raised your hand. Did you want to go ahead and unmute, or would you like me to read your question? I am going to go ahead and read Duncan's question for him. Can you please comment specifically why the VSP score produced by Earthjustice was so much higher than the score that DTSC came up with?
Marcia, I'll respond to that unless Ryan wants to chime in. So again, it's been a while since we looked at the letter that Earthjustice had prepared. For background, I'm going to start with the background. DTSC has scored the VSP score for Comedco. Earthjustice did similarly score the facility based on their interpretation of the regulations, how to score a facility. Definitely, our scores were different. We provided a response to Earthjustice, the differences in the way they did their scoring and why our scoring was the way we did it and the way they did it. And they are different, and there's some again, interpretation of the procedures that have been laid out, how the scoring is done. Duncan, we could share that response to Earthjustice. We could share that letter, our VSP scores. We could share with you Earthjustice letter, their scoring procedure, the way they did their scoring, and we could share with you our response to Earthjustice to their letter to us. So it's a lengthy letter, but probably best to share it with you, and we could part of the response to these questions we could post out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm getting prompted that it is time to move on to our next presentation. Please, if you have other questions about violation scoring procedure, you can email us, you can type them into the Q&A feature, and we'll respond to any questions that we have not been able to respond to tonight. Thank you. All right, please go ahead. We have Luis Garcia from the cleanup program, and he's going to be sharing, our project manager, and he's going to be sharing an update, our last update of the evening.
Hi, Marcia, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Luis Garcia. I am the project manager for the cleanup program in dealing with the Comeco facility. And today I'd like to present an update, particularly on those three bulleted items: the current conditions report, the transect sampling, and the Comeco impacted area. That being said, I'll begin on the current conditions report. Now, the current conditions report was submitted to the cleanup program, and it essentially provides pertinent information to the facility, including operations, processes, interim measures taken, and it summarizes investigations to date, identifies any data gaps, information on or outside of the facility. Now, some of these data gaps include areas on the facility itself, such as the septic tank, seepage pit, or continuing to evaluate surface and groundwater, the data quantity, also areas by the wastewater treatment area and furnace area, which would be addressed as part of their closure plan submitted to the permitting unit. Now, the cleanup program is currently reviewing the current conditions report, and we anticipate to complete a review by the end of the month. I'd like to move on to the transect sampling. The transect sampling work plan was prepared by the cleanup program, and it was implemented by the facility. Now, it was implemented in order to continue to evaluate impacts outside of the quarter mile originally investigated in 2016. Now, the purpose of the transect sampling was to evaluate whether there's a trend, such as concentrations increasing or decreasing with distance from the facility, and also to compare the concentrations of lead up to the ambient study areas. Now, just a little background info, the ambient study areas were sampled approximately 5 miles from the facility as part of the 2016 investigation. And this was done to assess concentrations outside of influence from the Comeco facility. So the purpose of the sampling was to obtain a data set that is representative of conditions similar to the surrounding area of the facility. Now, the transect sampling occurred along street parkways, right-of-ways, and along the residential grass meridians. 364 samples were collected from 10 transects from a quarter mile up to a mile from the facility. The cleanup program is currently reviewing the results of the transect sampling. Now, moving on to the Comeco impacted area. In 2016, as part of that RCRA facility investigation, up to a quarter mile, there were some areas that were identified with hazardous levels of lead in shallow soil. Some of these areas include, that were directly adjacent to the facility, include areas on Salt Lake, 7th Avenue, and Bonelli Street, and including the commercial areas by the commercial building on 7th and Bonelli Street. Now, the facility removed approximately 2,300 tons of contaminated soil, and work was completed in March of this year. Now, a completion report was submitted, and we are currently reviewing the report. Can we move on to the next slide? So, some of our next steps that we would need to complete include a complete review of the current conditions report in itself, and also complete our review of the transect sampling report. Now, last but not least, once we finish our review of those two reports, that would help in making a decision whether additional investigations or cleanup are needed in areas adjacent or further out from the Comeco facility. And that's all I have for now. I'll take any questions, or the cleanup team will take any questions.
All right. We have a question that came in early on in the Q&A feature, so we'll go to that one first and then take some raised hands. The question we have is, why have you put the perimeter soil investigation on the website, but not completely explain the results? So I'm going to put that question in our answered column if you want to elaborate on those sampling results.
I'm sorry, Marcia, can you repeat that real quick?
Sure. There's a question about the perimeter soil investigation. An anonymous attendee would like to have a better picture of what those results revealed. If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, this is Jose Diaz, and so yeah, we as reports come in to us, we make them available to the public. So we post them on our website, just that so folks can get a chance to review them. We haven't completed, our review of that document, and so we, that while the document has some conclusions, we don't at this point we're not ready to agree with those conclusions. When we provide our conclusions, we'll direct the facility to either revise the report and do additional investigation if necessary. One of the questions that we received, and that it's just taking us a little longer to make a decision on, is that we received a question that we didn't have, or we received a comment that our work plan just didn't have enough samples along all the transects. So we're having a statistician. We're looking into, to hire a statistician to just look at the strength of the data and look at the entire area, look at all the 6,000 samples that were collected within the quarter-mile radius, and look at the ambient study areas, look at the distribution of those sampling points, and help us make a decision as to whether we have sufficient sampling points to make a decision. That's why it's taking a little longer to for DTSC. But if anyone has any questions, as to why we selected these locations, we have a work plan as well that was made available, and that is. Kind of has the rationale for making those decisions, for choosing those locations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jose. We have a question in the chat about a question in the Q&A feature about testing done at the mobile home park, and Adriana also has her hand raised. So if you'd like to speak. If you have anything other, if you'd like to verbalize that and ask anything else, I'll invite you.
Thank you. Yes, I would definitely like to ask the question. I know that because it's private property, the mobile home park was not tested when we went out door to door about a couple of years ago. Can you tell us whether you have done it currently?
We have not done the mobile home park. The mobile home park is located just outside the quarter-mile radius. And so, and then when we did the transit sampling, we were looking at, following pretty much right-of-ways, parkways, streets as a basis for those transits. We didn't have a very good success, as you know, with the quarter-mile radius on getting access agreements to properties, and that was actually a criticism of our report, that out of 368 homes, we only got access to 132 homes. But if we need to do additional investigation, expand the quarter-mile radius, the mobile home park will be an area that we will be looking to get access agreements to collect samples.
That would be great, because that would make it more accurate. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I will go to our next raised hand. The person just has the initials NT. I'm inviting you to ask your question now.
Sorry.
That's okay. We can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I pressed that on accident.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Actually, you know what? My wife does have a question. Hang on.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, I joined late and we're totally new to the community, but we're looking for to purchase a home and just wanted to know because we're learning about this, just being new to the community. If we were to be interested in a house property, that is what was the radius that we should be concerned, and what are the steps that we need to take to have it tested if it was not tested, or where can we find that information?
If this is Jose again, if you'd like to know about specifically where we tested in the past, there are some reports available in Envirostore, but you can contact me directly,
Okay.
and I can get the address of the of the home that you're looking at, and I can tell you about whether we sampled that or not, whether we attempted to sample that home or not.
Okay.
And there's I can give you a lot of information about lead in general, lead in housing and lead in from different sources.
Right. Okay, great. Jose, and you're going to give me a phone number.
Sure, I can give you a phone number. Just between you and I, though. 818 968 1885.
Thank you, Jose. Your last name, sir?
Diaz, D-I-A-Z.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
And Elsa will be sharing our DTSC contact information at the end of the meeting as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks. We've got several folks in the queue. I'm going to call on people who haven't had an opportunity to speak yet. So there's someone signed on with the it says 1+ Nord N100. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question. Give you a minute to unmute. There you go. Hello. It shows that you're unmuted, but I don't hear anything. Oh, it looks like you're reconnecting. Sometimes we all have technical difficulties. We'll give our meeting participant a moment to sign on. The person whose device has 1+ Nord N100, inviting you to ask your question now. Okay, we'll see if we can come back to you. I'm going to invite Byron Chan to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Byron Chan. I had a question about the Transect sampling plan. We submitted comments on the Transect sampling plan. We submitted those on February 26th, 2021. Attached to those comments we included a memorandum from an expert in this area, Dr. Jim Wells, who has worked in lead and soil sample testing, most recently with the Exide Advisory Group. And the letter expressed several concerns with the Transect sampling plan, including, as Jose just mentioned, the inadequate number of samples and several other structural failures with the plan that basically set up the sampling to fail. We haven't received a response or really a recognition of those comments. And I was wondering if those comments have been received, if DTSC is planning to respond to the concerns in that letter. I do have a few other questions about that as well. So my first question is about those comments and whether we'll receive a response.
问题是，我们以前有寄过去一些问题，我就想知道你们有没有收到。
Oh, excuse me. Okay, and then the second one is I think Jose mentioned that you are currently reviewing the Transect sampling report. I was wondering what that specifically entailed.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. Amy, can you please mute?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
No, sorry. So sorry. My first question is about the comments. My second question is about what does a review of the Transect sampling report entail specifically, and is there a timeline for the public to know about the results of that review? My final question is, I'm sorry, there's a siren in the background, but I'm curious about what are the next steps with the Transect sampling plan. So say that is it more testing, is it cleanup, or is there enforcement of actually holding Quemeco accountable for contamination around the facility? So those are my three questions. Let me know if you need me to repeat them. Well, thank you.
Marcia, I think I can answer those questions. Perhaps
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Perhaps with Jose's help. Brian, yes, we did receive the comments. Thank you for putting those together. We have reviewed them. Hopefully soon we can be getting a response over to you, a written response. With respect to the evaluation of the information, as Jose mentioned, we are seeking some assistance from a statistician to get some help in that regard, to help interpret the data that we have. So we haven't made a determination yet. We reviewed the data, we have it. We haven't made a determination yet on whether we need additional sampling, whether the sampling is adequate. What we do know, and I'll let Jose speak to this, is that my understanding is we didn't find anything that was extremely high or would present some kind of imminent threat out there based on the data that we did collect. Therefore, no action has been taken at this time because there's no imminent threat based on what was collected. Hopefully we can get a response over to you soon, a written response. Again, it's taking some time. We don't have a definite time because we are seeking assistance for some additional expert assistance to help us out. We've been consulting with the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, OEHA, who have statisticians on staff who could hopefully assist us. And so, we're short answer is we're still evaluating the information and we're working on it, but we don't have a specific timeline at this point.
Thank you. Jose or Luis, did either of you want to contribute any further?
No, this is Luis. I don't have anything additional to add. I think Peter got it. We're still working on the response, and until we complete our review, we won't know if additional sampling or cleanup will be needed.
Thank you. Also, we're having a little bit of trouble with the Chinese interpretation line. If you can reassign Amy as the interpreter for that line, we'd appreciate that. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay, let me go back to the ONE+. I'm going to invite you to unmute and ask your question at this time. I heard you unmuted before. Let's see. All right. We have Duncan McKee. We've gotten through all the questions from people who haven't had the opportunity to speak. So now we're just going to go through the line of the folks that we have with raised hands. Duncan McKee, would you like to unmute and ask your question about the cleanup update?
Yes, thank you. So I have 3 quick questions and thing that's of concern. Well, DTSC found 14,000 parts per million outside Quemetco's fence line and wrote a letter to Quemetco saying that the public was at imminent, immediate danger and requested that Quemetco take immediate action to the DTSC community. Why isn't DTSC going back to those same locations and testing? Why are they purposely not testing those locations? Question number 1. Question number 2, previous DTS testing has shown that there are hazardous waste levels when they did solubility testing, which is very important because it gives us an indication of how likely the lead in the soil is to go into solution and to end up in our water. Okay? And question number 3, why are we purposely not doing fingerprinting so that we can definitively determine the source of the toxic metals that are in our soils? Anybody have an answer for that?
Yeah, so the areas where previously they had high concentrations of lead at the property boundary, or just outside the property boundary, actually it's kind of saddled the property boundary. Those areas were cleaned up. In those areas, most of those areas were covered with either concrete and the fence was moved. And so if there is some residual lead left behind, it's under a protective barrier. And, you know, in 2016, we did go back and sample some of the same locations that were previously identified as having high concentrations. And some of these areas were cleaned up just recently. When it comes to the solubility tests are done to determine whether soil, when it's going to go to a landfill, you know, is considered a hazardous waste when you run it through this leachability test. When you do this leachability test, you put it into very acidic conditions. You run it through acid, and whatever lead you can extract from that soil, that's how you determine whether it's a hazardous waste or not, and that's how they determine what kind of landfill can accept that. When you have lead in soil in the subsurface, in order for that lead to leach out of that soil, you need very acidic conditions that would move that lead from let's say 1 foot to 3 feet and so on. Very acidic conditions. In other words, your problem is not going to be so much the hazardous waste concentrations of lead. You're going to have a condition where you have everything eroding around that area. So that's kind of like a simulation of what they do in the lab. They essentially destroy the soil with the acid to extract the lead that will leach out under those conditions.
Well, that's
the fingerprinting.
Accurate. That's actually not accurate, is it?
Okay. Well, we can,
because number one, Quemeco's dealing in large quantities of acid, sulfuric acid that's in those batteries, lead acid batteries. Okay, and the high levels of lead in and around Quemeco, EPA found actually 330 some odd thousand parts per million on the Quemeco property in the past. Okay, it's documented. And Quemeco has been documented. They used to have that open surface impoundment that held 180 some odd thousand gallons of wastewater, acidic wastewater. So for you to sit here and say it's something in the lab, yes, I agree. They use nitric acid and other acids to dissolve soil to do testing on it in ICP MS. But it's very important to do solubility testing on the soils that are documented to have high lead levels in and around Quemeco so that we can tell if that lead is going into solution and ending up in the surface water of the San Jose Creek or percolating down into the groundwater that also, by the way, testing has yielded high lead levels. Okay, 1,800 parts per million, 58 feet, I think it is, below ground surface at Quemeco is documented in your documents, in your reports, not mine, Jose. So for you to come and try and mislead people with that is it's unacceptable, Jose. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. And then what about the fingerprinting?
I'm going to ask you to allow our team members to respond to your questions. We have several other hands raised, so if you'd like,
sure. Let's hear the answer to the last question on the fingerprinting, so we know where all this contamination came from. And I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
And Jose, before you talk about the fingerprinting, can you please talk about groundwater and what we found so far with respect to any? I think the question had to do with leachability of lead and the impact to groundwater, and so we've investigated the groundwater at this point. So maybe you want to talk real quick about the results that we've had, the depth of groundwater and the results that we've had for our groundwater investigations.
Yeah, so there's a well network within the property boundary, and they're actually in the process of adding additional wells off the property. And so based on what we have seen on groundwater, there's no evidence to suggest that high concentrations of lead are leaching from the former surface impoundment areas within the facility to groundwater. And all the reports are available. Now, with the fingerprinting, as you know, there's been in 2015, 2016, the facility was putting together a work plan to do fingerprinting. There's no well-established method of clearly identifying the protocols for figuring out how lead exists in the environment and how can it be identified and how can it be quantified, and more importantly, how can it be tied up to a source? So after Quemeco, we provided several comments on their work plan, and as Quemeco abandoned the idea of pursuing a fingerprinting study. Since then, the state has been not just because of this facility, but because of other facilities across the state. We're in the process of trying to come up with a protocol, a fingerprinting protocol for identifying sources of lead. And that is going to take a while to develop. That's going to take a while for the regulatory community, for the community, and for the academia to accept. And, in the meanwhile, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pilot testing going on to try to evaluate different protocols to identify the sources of lead.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Sorry, Jose. I expect Luis to give that update. I'm gonna OnePlus Nord. I'm gonna give you one more shot to ask your question. Then we have a couple more raised hands, and we'll have some closing remarks. I see you unmuted.
Buenas tardes.
Good evening.
Bueno, solamente quería decirles que yo apoyo a la compañía de Quemetco porque me gusta el reciclaje responsable. Gracias.
Gracias.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Rebecca Overmeyer Velasquez.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to just provide some context, some historical context for the soil sampling. But before I did that, I have to right away step in and correct Jose Diaz. In fact, there are really good scientific protocols for determining the origin of lead, the type of lead that it is, and therefore where it might be coming from. In fact, in the report that I have from Dr. Wells from 2017, as recently as that, the National Academy of Sciences published the investigative strategies for lead source attribution at Superfund sites associated with mining activities and sources of lead contamination at or near Superfund sites. And in fact, there's quite a rigorous and well-documented ways to attribute the origins of lead. So it's not true. That's not true that we can't know it. And I think that's really important for people to hear that, that this is the kind of information that, in fact, Quemetco wants us to believe, that we can't know whatever we find in the soil, where that's from. And that's just absolutely not true. The other thing is about this sampling, early on, the plan had always been to sample out to a mile. And Quemetco didn't like that. And the basic problem is that DTSC bends over backwards to let Quemetco get its way. And that's obvious. It's patently obvious because they decided, no, we're not going to do a mile radius. After all, despite what Al said, well, we know that lead can go far from Exide. We know that's true. They stuck to the quarter-mile radius, and then they stuck to that, and they stuck to that, and they weren't going to budge until they came up with this newest plan, which is destined to fail. And if you would bother to take a look at the letter and the report that we sent to you about this transect sampling plan, you would understand all of the reasons why this plan that you came up with and that was approved by Quemetco is completely inadequate to understanding, to come to a really good understanding of the extent and depth of the contamination that this facility has contributed to our communities. A glaring problem, folks, is that this sampling does not go into residences. There is no sampling of folks' yards, none. So we have no idea what the situation is in people's yards where kids are playing. We have no idea in some of the hotspots that we know exist up on Lomitas, up in Avocado Heights, for example. We have no idea from this plan, at least, what the situation is, what kind of contamination people are living with on a daily basis. And you can't, and you have already, DTSC folks very deliberately told the people around Exide that there's a difference between sampling people's yards and sampling public right-of-ways. Those are different things. Well, in this plan, they're saying that it's okay, we'll sample the public rights-of-way, and we're just going to extrapolate from there to what we imagine is happening is the situation in your own yard. But that's just not true. And now they're telling us that we should just trust them, that this report will tell us. It won't tell us anything. And sadly, you're going to have to go backwards now and ask statisticians about how to construct the sampling plan that's already been acted upon. I mean, that's just seriously, that's bad practice. You should have that all set up at the beginning and have your statisticians, environmental scientist statisticians who understand the ways in which statistics can be used to quantify what's out in the environment. I mean, honestly, folks, this is not new information. That should have been done from the very beginning. And so now what we get is a plan with data that's useless. And so we're back basically to square one. And we don't even know fingerprinting, which we should have known because we can know that. We don't know the extent and the depth of contamination. It's astonishing how little we have known in all of these years. And I just have to say, I think I expressed the frustration of a lot of people with this agency and its inability to do the job it's supposed to do, which is to protect us, to protect the public's health. And you're just
Rebecca, I'm going to ask. I appreciate your comments. I just want to make sure that we can get to any other questions that we have because we have a limited time here tonight. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask Angela Johnson to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, it's Angela. I have a question about the Transect sampling plan that, and one of the comments that I think I heard was that based on the information that you collected, and Rebecca just went through and Byron went through what we think are limitations in how that data is being collected. But you noted that you didn't find any data that made you think there was any imminent danger out there. So I'm wondering, did any of the samples that got returned higher than 80 parts per million?
Yes, there was. Yes,
hi Angela. Yes, there was samples that were above 80 parts per million. So what was meant about the imminent danger was samples above 1,000 parts per million. But yes, there was several samples above the 80 parts per million.
Isn't 80 parts per million California's standard for soil, residential soil?
That is the screening number for residential soil.
And didn't California come up with that level because they, through the magic of statistics, they were able to figure out that being exposed to soils with that kinds of parts per million could result in elevation of blood lead levels?
That's correct.
And so what does it mean that there's no imminent endangerment if you have samples that are above 80 parts per million, and the science tells us that at that level, if people are exposed to that, they can get a 1 milligram per deciliter increase in their blood lead levels, and we know that there's no safe level for lead. I'm just wondering what you mean when you say there's nothing that showed up in the data that made you think, you needed to act quickly.
So it is correct that 80 parts per million is the screening level for lead, and we commonly use it as a cleanup rule. It is not a bright line 80 parts per million, though we look at exposure pathways and we look at typically the exposure routes based on a 95% of confidence level, which is a way of saying we look at groupings of samples to determine whether or not the 80 parts per million threshold is exceeded. And so while yes, we found samples above 80 parts per million, right at this point, we're still evaluating, but we haven't seen groupings of samples that had extremely elevated concentrations that would need immediate removal or attention.
So you're saying that just chronically exposing the surrounding communities to elevated levels of lead in the soil is not sufficient for action. Rather, there's some other criteria about groupings and other kinds of things that now, so we're going to err on the side of leaving the neurotoxin in the soil instead of erring on the side of taking action to clean up. Did I understand your comment?
We base our decisions based on risk to human health and in consultation with our toxicologists to determine if there's a potential threat or risk to human health. And so these are some of the analyses that we're going through right now when evaluating the data. With respect to the transect sampling data, Cametco did not prepare that work plan. DTSC actually prepared the work plan. We had an in-house staff who wrote the work plan, who developed the strategy. The strategy was a more along the lines of determining if we could find trends. That's why we did transects from the facility. We're trying to look at trends in concentrations from the facility in an outward fashion. And so that's essentially what we're trying to get answered by this investigation. Are we seeing a trend of lead concentrations emanating from the Cametco facility? We do have data around the facility in the neighborhood already that we had collected previously, but we wanted to go out in different directions and gather a more broad scope of data. And that was the purpose for us preparing the work plan. And then, of course, if Cametco declined to implement the work plan that we prepared, then we were prepared to implement the work plan ourselves, but we didn't have to go that route.
Right. Well, Peter, as you well know, we submitted comments about our deep concerns about the adequacy of that plan, but we don't need to just debate that right now. But what I will say is I want to offer a friendly amendment to what Rebecca said. We've got a ton of data around that facility that shows that people are being exposed to elevated levels in lead. And it is completely incredible to believe Cametco's position that although their lead smelter has been operating in this community for decades, that they've contributed zero to the surrounding lead levels in the soil. It's just not, it doesn't even pass the laugh test. And so while you are diligently looking for trends and groupings and transects and statisticians and the like, I would just like to remind you that people are being exposed right now. They were exposed yesterday. They were exposed 5 years ago. They were exposed 20 years ago. They'll be exposed tomorrow, and who knows how much longer. And I just want to emphasize, for the purposes of this conversation, the complete unacceptability of the speed at which DTSC is acting, setting aside the quality of the work that DTSC is doing. I would love to urge you to really think amongst yourselves about how do you increase the urgency so that your urgency, it doesn't have to match the urgency of the surrounding community, but it needs to be higher than what it is right now. And I look forward to rapid decisions and follow through so that we can immediately get to the project of protecting people's health, their safety, their quality of life, and getting the mess that we all know Cameco has left in this community cleaned up.
Yeah, and thank you for your comments. And I just want to, just for everyone's benefit, clarify that it is not DTSC's position that Cameco did not contaminate outside of their facility. And in fact, we just did some cleanup around their facility because that was attributed to Cameco. And as we move along, of course, and we continue with our attribution work and our sampling, anything that we tie to Cameco, we are going to require them to clean that up if it poses a risk to human health. So that is a guarantee. With respect to Jose's comments, and just to be clear with Jose's comments on the attribution work is can be difficult. There are certain methods that the department has developed, as well as other methods out there that the department is exploring. I think Jose was more referring to the difficulty of attributing lead based on a mixture. It's not necessarily like a mining site where you have certain known chemicals or a characteristic that you can rely upon to try to attribute some of the contamination. We have a mixture of batteries and sources and so forth. And so that is a difficulty. That is not going to stop us, however, from developing the solutions to make sure, one, our primary concern is there contamination out in the community that needs to be cleaned up. That's the primary thing. We can figure out who's responsible for that later. The first priority for us is to find out if there's something out there that poses a health risk and needs to be cleaned up. And then we'll take care of that. Then we'll determine who's responsible for that and hold them accountable. So just wanted to leave with that thought.
Thanks, Peter. I think Elsa is going to provide us with some closing remarks.
Thank you all for attending. We have some questions from anonymous people we will not be able to answer by email, but those that have a name, we will be able to answer your questions if they were not answered live. Once again, I want to thank you. And please be looking out for information on the VSP workshop, which I will send to everyone who attended today if we have an email address. And we will also be notifying you as soon as we know when we start the process for outreach concerning the permit. So thank you all. I wish this would have been live where we could actually see you all, and looking forward for us to get back to normal again. I did put up the slide for a while with the contacts. You could contact anyone in permitting. You could contact Samco at sam.co@dtsc.ca.gov, or Ryan Mia for VSP at ryan.mia@dtsc.ca.gov, and Luis Garcia for cleanup, luis.garcia@dtsc.ca.gov. Or if you want to contact anyone else that spoke, you could contact me and I will give you their contact information at elsa.lopez@dtsc.ca.gov. So once again, thank you all for participating. We had a good turnout and we look forward to continuing our communications. So thank you all. And this will be the end of the meeting. Thank you.